parents of kids that did not succeed as adults, jail, drugs, etc. How do you feel about a decision and experience of being a parent? Well, before they became a part of my family, my now stepmom was a single mother and a well-known party girl. She left my stepbrother at home alone, generally neglected him, and she would get calls down at the bar because he was hungry and didn't know how to use the stove, etc. He ended up pretty screwed up and wound up getting involved in drugs and theft, and was in and out of jail a bunch. It took my now stepmom years to come to terms with what she did, and by the time I met her she was already well on the way to recovery, trying to be a better person and doing her best to help him become one too. Unfortunately for my stepbrother, he was in too deep, and though his mom was finally this well-adjusted and loving supportive person, it was really too little too late and he couldn't help but relapse. He got depressed because he couldn't seem to take back control of his life, and per the note he left, he committed suicide a few years ago as a means of apologizing for not being able to go straight with her. There isn't a day that goes by where she doesn't talk about him with regret in her voice. She says she was never upset with him about his actions. She was only ever upset with herself for not raising him to really understand the difference between right and wrong. I would call my mom at the bars too. Only child, home alone, scared of the dark. I recently burned my junior high school diary I had because it was just too sad to even read, and I would never want my mom to read it or anyone at that. I helped raise my sister after my dad died. She had a bunch of trauma as a teenager and has a chronic condition called gastroparesis exacerbated by a hormone imbalance that got worse when she hit puberty. So she was in a lot of physical and emotional pain and was throwing up all the time. This led her to develop an eating disorder and a drug addiction, which she went inpatient for when she was 17. She's 21 now and has a lot of health issues. She never got her GED and doesn't work currently. She's not medicated seeing anyone for her mental illnesses like her bipolar disorder, so sometimes she's really obstinate with us, but mostly she wants to get a job and her education and a community. Basically, and I think you have to do this with most kids as they enter young adulthood, we had to change our expectations for her. She was always really talented and smart, but if she doesn't want to audition for shows or go to college, that's okay now. We just want her to be happy and to chill out a little. Okay, a lot. I'd like her to chill out a lot. She might never be as responsible or adult as me, but she'll probably keep growing up in little bits. We're proud of her for her accomplishments, like not relapsing, and we'll support her as she figures out what she wants and is capable of more. Also, to answer the question more fully, my mom sometimes says that if she had known the amount of pain my sister had experienced she would have thought twice about having her. I sometimes threaten to give her back to the powers that be, and overall, maybe because it's mostly been a good month, I can't imagine life without my sister and I don't think it's a bad decision to have kids if you like them and want them. I just want to say, as the frick up daughter of my own family, that the support and understanding you have for her is amazing. You're a good sibling and I'm sure she's just as grateful as I would be for that kind of love. I have 4 kids over the age of 30 and 2 of them have not been successful. My son is 36 and recently became a registered sex offender for child P. He was considered the smart one too. He had a bright future ahead of himself. My daughter is 38 and lives with me. She is unemployed and never finished high school. She did so many drugs that I suspect that she has brain damage. She has 2 kids out of wedlock, just had another. I don't speak to my other daughter and rarely see my other son. They are both too angry at me. I can't go back and pinpoint where things went wrong and where things got worse and where it got to the point of no return. Yes, I was a terrible parent. My son, the sex offender, said it best: you should not have had any kids. That hurt me because I realized that he was not trying to hurt me but being honest. As I gotten older, 73, I realized that I dealt my kids a bad hand and I will never forgive myself knowing that my kids had an awful childhood because of me. If I could go back in time, I would have given them all up for adoption. In retrospect, I can see where I could have done things differently in some instances of my parenting decisions and it might have influenced circumstances for the better. That being said, I can also honestly say that even with things as they are, I enjoy being a parent. My children are in their mid to late 20s and their behavioral patterns are pretty well set, but I still have hope that they will find their way to happier, more fulfilling lives. I never loved anyone with my entire being before I had my first child, and I hope that I have conveyed that capacity to them. My kid is great, but I help with a lot of underprivileged kids. I am currently working with one mom in particular whose kid for some reason really trusts and respects me. The kid's mom is a hard-working single woman, and unfortunately, that means the kid is out hanging out with the really wrong people right now. We are throwing everything we can at saving the kid from incarceration, even trying to get him into a military-type school for troubled children. That can cost upwards of $400 a day. Kids do dumb crap when they are going through puberty. Unfortunately, just being around the wrong freaking people during that time can undo a fair amount of what the parents have tried to teach. The kid dodged a massive bullet a few weeks ago when two of the guys he was hanging out with just hours before were picked up for breaking into cars. The cops know him by name and have picked him up for other petty crimes in the past, but one serious frick up and they are going to throw the book at him. His mom is totally flustered. I can tell she really is trying, but it is incredibly challenging when you are in that situation. Not a parent, but I can give the experience of dealing with someone who was in denial about how terrible a parent she was. When my grandfather was 46, he divorced my grandmother and left their 3 kids to run off with an 18-year-old West Virginia hillbilly, and they had 3 other kids together. Remarkably, they were still together when my grandpa died at 85. I had never really known either of them growing up, but got to know them both in the last year of his life. The difference between the 3 kids my grandpa raised with my grandma and the 3 he raised with his second wife are astounding. My dad and aunt have done quite well for themselves, and while my uncle was always a bit of a mess, he had his crap together a heck of a lot better than any of the kids in the other family did. Their son was in prison for child molestation. One of their daughters at the time was in prison for drug possession. Fun side note, that daughter also once stole her parents' Christmas tree to pawn it for drug money, and the other daughter had a history of drug abuse that she had only recently recovered from and was working as a waitress. The thing is though, my grandpa would only ever talk about how proud he was to have raised 2 happy families, and his second wife would go on and on about how parents these days don't know how to raise their kids, but that she raised hers right. The one time I pointed out that 2 of her 3 kids were in prison, her response was, well, I did spoil them a bit. The moral of the story is that a lot of bad parents are in denial about being bad parents, often even to the point of criticizing how other people raise their kids. My kid isn't an adult yet. He's 11, but he has had emotional problems his entire life, and if he doesn't change he'll eventually end up in jail. I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't know how to handle him. It's hard because he's always been such an unhappy person, even as a baby, that I don't have many positive memories to look back on. He is intelligent, and I do think he could succeed in life if he would just realize it's easier to get what you want if you don't make the people around you miserable. We sent him to live with my in-laws, but they are about done and he'll have to come back soon. His sister is adamant she doesn't want to live with him again. We could send him back to an RTC, but that would be his college car fund, and again, he would have to come home eventually. We're not fooling ourselves with the college fund anymore, but I grew up poor and the amount of money we've spent on him for absolutely no result staggers me when I actually think about it. As a kid I had a friend. We weren't that close, but our parents were friends, who grew up in an almost identical family as mine. After high school I got incredibly lucky to find a great job, and he ended up with a classic felon with a bad crowd situation, and he plus 2 others robbed a place and wounded a person. So at 18 he was sentenced to 30 years in prison despite being his first offense. Halfway through his sentence I started emailing him, and we have actually become very good friends. One of the things we talk about is his parents, namely his mother. She feels a massive amount of guilt for his situation and blames herself. She tries to do as much as she can for him. She paid for him to do correspondence to get a degree while in prison, but she also finds it very hard to actually visit him or talk to him in person because of the guilt. My daughter is an alcoholic. She is turning 24 soon. I honestly don't know how long she has been drinking. She barely made it through high school, but did go on to college, only to drop out. She's been homeless several times. Her father and I blame ourselves, and then again, we can't figure out where we went wrong. We worked hard to provide for our family. They never wanted for anything. We were also there emotionally for them. My daughter and I had a kind of rocky relationship because we have similar personalities. My other two kids think that we bent over backwards for her and gave in too much, but she would just play us. They didn't see the manipulation. I'm not a success by any means, and my dad has even told me I failed him as a son. I highly doubt he blames himself and his parenting though. There's no way constantly putting me down, berating me, one-upping me and telling me I'll never be crap could have possibly had any negative effect on my growth. A certain amount of parenting is a crapshoot regarding environmental circumstances, a kid's temperament, biological proclivities, etc. Another amount of parenting is good decisions like providing love and structure. No one knows the magic formula between the two, and anyone who says they do is an arrogant prick. I am adopted. All 6 of my siblings are adopted. I have some strong opinions on nature-nurture as a result, and think that adoption, or setups like it, are the only real way to study biology versus culture. I agree that it's arrogant when people don't acknowledge that it's a crapshoot, for sure. I think it's silly when people go on and on about parenting success when their kid is not a grown-up, too. I am the daughter of the parent in this scenario, and the kid in this scenario is my half-brother. For my half-siblings, my dad was pretty much an absent parent, even when he had them. Their mother had drug issues and they followed suit, and the only thing my dad did about it was kick them out of our house as young teenagers. They all had serious drug issues and were in and out of jail, and he never did anything about it. By the time they were in their 20s he had completely lost touch with them. Nearly 10 years later we got a call that my half-brother died of an overdose. He says he regrets how things happened with them, but honestly it feels a little superficial. Sure, he has reconnected with them, but it's mostly them calling him. He never makes any efforts. My other half-siblings still struggle with drugs and he's never so much as offered anything to help them. To me it seems like the death of my half-brother should have been a wake-up call to him as a father, but he just doesn't seem to care about his living children enough to do anything. He pretends everything is fine and he has some perfect family. My siblings and I are great examples of this. There are 4 kids, myself, oldest, the twins, 1 boy 1 girl, and then my baby brother. I am 5 years older than the twins and 10 years older than my baby brother. All of us are from the same parents. I was an early accident. Twins were planned. Youngest was an accident. My parents pushed the heck out of me. I would be physically punished if I made anything lower than an A in school. It was rough growing up but it pushed me to be the best person I can be. I just finished up grad school and got married. The twins were a mess. They realized they pushed me too hard, but weren't going to lighten up on me. So they lightened up on them and were trying to be the cool parents. My sister got knocked up at 15 and is now serving jail time for H. My brother, who was the more intelligent of the two, joined the military to gain some discipline in his life. He got his degree and is now an officer in the Marines. I basically raised my youngest brother. My parents just sat him in front of a computer and ignored him. I saw how the twins were developing and decided I could save my little brother. I stayed at home for my first 2 years of college and then moved to a larger university to keep in contact with him. I paid for him a World of Warcraft account and we played almost every day together. He would use that as a place to talk to me and vent, and I would help him figure out his problems and just give advice. Since my parents never punished him, I would. If he screwed up bad, I would change the password on his account so he couldn't log on. He is 16 now, and I live about 30 minutes away from my parents. He stays with me and my wife, and is top of his class. I am not a parent yet, but I am dang proud of my baby brother and resent my parents for how they treated my siblings. I came out fine, but they fricked up on them. I am one of 4 kids. My 3 other siblings all have spent a lot of time in jail and do drugs. Both of my parents have as well. My mother is a convicted felon. My father makes about 15k a year. I am nothing like any of these people. We share DNA. I have had to nearly completely disassociate with them. I would say lack of education on their part was the major factor in the failures of my siblings. The drug use and poverty are also outcomes from that, so I wouldn't really pin those things on it. It's very difficult to speak to them. They give terrible advice. That's really the bottom line. When I was in my early 20s I took their advice because I was so afraid of making mistakes as an adult, but in hindsight I should have never done that. It cost me time and a very considerable amount of money. I am grateful I could step outside the box and look at fire lives for what it is. In a nutshell, they have what I call bad problems. I have concluded people have either good problems or bad problems. We all have them, but some people allow themselves to maintain a series of bad problems in their life. It comes down to what you decide to give a frick about. So for example, I see my responsibilities as a normal part of life where my parents see theirs as a bad problem. If they had been better educated they could see outside the box and realize that everyone has problems and theirs are not unique. Therefore, to wallow in self-pity is not a solution. My parents let problems build up and they do not take action. Responsibility. They seek handouts, suffer consequences, or run away. They know they have failed as parents because the only children still around are the 3 that have turned out badly. I don't necessarily mean they failed as parents because they didn't go to college. When I say they are uneducated I mean they stopped trying to genuinely learn. My father is 66 years old. My mother is 56. Both in very poor health, no savings, and no spouse. My wife and I raised my son. He smoked weed, got in trouble with the law for speeding and never attended college. He is currently 26, about to be 27, and he still lives at home. He isn't a bad kid. He coaches high school sports and he has a lot going for him. I think we messed up as parents when it came to giving him proper guidance. When he was growing up my wife and I both worked in the DC area. We both left at 6:30 am. Our son went to school at 6:45 by bus. We never saw him off. He would arrive home from school at 2:30 while my wife and I were at work still. We both would arrive home around 6:30-7. Our son was basically home alone, a lot, and I think that's what led him to end up going down the path he did. This whole trend with him started when he could ride the bus on his own in 4th grade. So for about 10 years from 8-18 he was on his own after school and most of the day. I'd give anything to go back and make time for him and express that we wanted him to try new things and be successful. Luckily he played sports and made friends, but I truly believe we didn't do right by him. I think unfortunately it's just how it has to go sometimes. Nowadays he is lost, has no real hope or belief in himself and just wants to become something, but he doesn't know what. We are taking the steps to help him, but he has admitted it's very hard to see us as friends now because when he was acting out we had to be strict, not realizing we basically were coming home and screaming at him after not seeing him all day. He eventually opened up to us that he hated that and always felt like we had no real relationship. I'm 49 and he's 27. We barely talk, but I blame myself. You have been visited by the wealth rat. Subscribe in 12 seconds and he will share his wealth with you. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.